Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Bank Street Players' world premiere production of Called. The play is presented in one act, and there will be no intermission. Now sit back, relax, and go back with us as we remember one of the most iconic figures in American sports, the legendary Paul Bear Bryant. Ladies and gentlemen, we give you Called.
I ain't never been nothing but a winner. Folks expect that, mainly because it's been true for so long. And that's a good thing. That's the kind of life you want to have. But don't think I ain't never lost. I've lost plenty along the way, believe you me. Being a winner doesn't mean you win everything every time. You're going to lose sometime. The point is you can't just cry when crying won't do you no good. Being a winner is what you do about the losses. Losing never made me want to quit. Losing made me want to fight that much harder. Take another shot. Some people might think that kind of attitude is of having a chip on your shoulder. The way you'd expect a man to think that started out with nothing and really didn't have much prospects of ever having anything. But I've known a lot of people who started out with nothing and they seem satisfied to leave it that way. Maybe I did have a chip on my shoulder. One thing's for damn sure, when I started out, I forevermore didn't have nothing. I was born and raised in Morrow Bottom, Arkansas. Now, I don't know where Morrow Bottom got its name, but for my money, they called it that just because there wasn't no more bottom under it. It was the bottomest place on the face of the planet. That it was just down the road from Fordyce, Arkansas, where I went to school. And Fordyce was about 60 miles down the road from Pine Bluff, which you might have heard of. And Pine Bluff was about 50 miles on down the road to Little Rock, which I know you've heard of. So you can see that Morrow Bottom was about as far off a beaten path as a fella could get. We were dirt poor. I worked for 50 cents a day, chopping cotton and working in the fields. So no, we didn't have anything to amount to much, but we really didn't even notice it. My daddy was a good man. He is Wilson Monroe Bryant. He was in poor health most of my life, but my mama, Ida Mae Bryant, was something. She did everything for everybody. Now, we must have eaten pretty good because I for sure grew up to be a big boy. I was really big for my age all my life. And I was strong as one of those mules I'm plowing. Strong enough to, well, you might have heard the story. When I was about 12 or maybe 14, things get a little harder to remember as you get old, but I know I was already playing football for the Fordyce Redbugs.
What in the world have you been up to, Paul? Your clothes is nearly ruined. Oh, why can't you take care of them just once?
Mama, you won't believe it, Mama. I wrestled a bear.
You what?
Wrestled a bear. This man in town, he had a bear he trapped, and he said if anybody could beat that bear wrestling, he'd pay him $5.
Oh, what foolishness are you talking about, Paul? A bear?
Yes'm, a big old bear, almost as big as me. And I wrestled him and I won.
Are you serious, child? You could have been killed.
But I wasn't. I just grabbed him from behind and then I pinned his arms and I held on for dear life. Except, well, he did kind of rip up my overalls.
Well, I should say he did. Paul William Bryant, what am I going to do with you? It's bad enough that you grow out of your clothes as soon as I can get them. Now you've gone and let some bear tear them to pieces.
Sorry, Mama.
Well, I suppose we can use that $5 to buy you some new breeches.
I don't have the $5, Mama.
Well, what? Now I thought
The man kind of forgot to pay me, but I did get a new name.
What new name?
Everybody started calling me Bear, slapping me on the back and hollering, "Here he is. This boy's a bear."
Oh, you can forget about being called a bear. That is not a fit name for a preacher.
She always wanted me to make a preacher.
All right, I expect we've had enough excitement for one evening. Go on inside and get cleaned up. It's supper time. Put those overalls on my chair. I'll have to sew them up again.
I always told her that coaching was a lot like preaching, but she never did believe me. Like I said, I was a big boy, and we moved to the town of Fordyce about the time I was 12 or 13. I remember watching the Fordyce football team practicing one afternoon, and I was trying to figure out what this game was all about. The only thing I knew about this football was hearing Graham McNamee when he called the 1926 Rose Bowl game on the radio. Alabama beat Washington 20-19 to win their very first national championship. And even though I didn't understand a thing I was hearing, I was hooked. The way McNamara described it, it hooked me for good. So here I am, I'm watching this Arkansas high school team practice, and Coach Cowan came up to me and looked me up and down and said, "Son, would you like to play football?" And I said, "Yes."
"Yes, sir, I would. How do you play?"
He said, "You see that fellow down there catching that pass?" I said,
"Yes, sir, I do."
He said that whenever he catches it, you run down there and try to kill him. That's all there is to it. So I played for the Fordyce Redbugs, and I've had exactly 2 head coaches. Coach Cowan was the first one, and I was fortunate. The 2 men who coached me were both straight up. They taught me more about the value of working hard and learning the basics than I got anywhere else. They were good men who knew what they wanted to achieve and how to go about getting it. And I was lucky for having been taught that. So we won a couple of state championships, and I guess I did my share to make that happen. Then somehow, I always thought Coach Cowan had something to do with it. I got the attention of the coaches over in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Now, football has been a way out of poverty for many a young man, and it was for me. When you don't have anything to go back to, and by gosh, you're going to work a little harder. It's never been just about a game for me. Never. Because I knew when I left Morrow Bottom, I was never going back to plowing those mules and chopping cotton for 50 cents a day. For some reason, the University of Alabama decided to offer me a chance to play football. And you can bet your bottom dollar I jumped at that chance. I went to Tuscaloosa in 1931, and I started as a tight end for 3 years under Coach Frank Thomas. He is the other head coach I was talking about. Coach Thomas always knew what to say, and he knew when to say it. I learned from him that timing is everything. In fact, I learned most everything I know about coaching from Frank Thomas. And I believe he learned it from Newt Rockne. He played quarterback for Rockne, and he knew how to be a leader. Now, I'll tell you this. You always want your quarterback to be a leader. Sometimes that don't work out. But when it does, you're starting out way ahead of the game. Not too long after I got down to Tuscaloosa, my father died. And that kind of shook me up. I was already pretty strong thinking about going back home. But I had this cousin, old Collins Kilgore, and he sat me down and he made me understand that if I quit on this chance, I wasn't ever going to get another one. That was my first real lesson about the dangers of quitting. And it must have been a good one, because the idea never occurred to me again. But as much as I learned about football in Tuscaloosa, as much as that made me what I am today, there was one thing that happened to me there that was more important than anything else that ever happened to me. That includes every kind of championship we ever won, award they ever gave me, or meeting presidents, or anything else that ever came into my life. Because in 1932, in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, was where Mary Harmon Black walked into my life. And she is worth 10 times all the rest of it put together. Mary Harmon Black was the best looking gal you or I ever laid eyes on.
Paul Bryant. I like that name. That's a nice name. So why does everybody call you Bear?
When I was a boy, I wrestled a bear.
You didn't.
I won, too.
You're trying to impress me, aren't you? You're making that up.
I wish I could impress you, but I ain't making it up. I wrestled a bear.
Nobody can wrestle a bear.
Nobody ever told me I couldn't, so I wrestled him. I won, too.
You said that already.
Oh, yeah, I did say that, didn't I?
Well, can't you say anything else?
Yes, ma'am, I sure can. Mary Harmon Black, you are the best looking gal me or anybody else has ever laid eyes on.
My, I guess you can say something else, Paul Bryant.
They call me Bear.
Mary Harmon and I got married in secret in 1935. Coach Thomas didn't like for his players to be married, and I wasn't sure whether or not I might even lose my scholarship.
Mary Harmon, I want you to be my wife, but we'll have to keep it secret.
If that's the way it has to be, then that's how we'll do it, Paul. It's probably for the best for me, too.
You don't have Coach Thomas to worry about.
No, but I got my family down in Troy, and they won't look too favorably on my getting married. If Daddy was still alive, he'd probably drive up here and shoot you.
You mean they don't want some plowboy from Morrow Bottom in the family? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is, it doesn't matter a fig what they want, Paul Bear Bryant. The only thing that matters is how I feel about you.
And how's that, Mary Harmon Black?
Like you're the best thing I've ever seen. And like you and I are going to have such a life together, it's going to make everybody in Troy, Alabama and Morrow Bottom, Arkansas turn green.
That'll be all right. Won't bother me if they turn a little crimson, too.
I never saw Paul play. Oh, I'd come to Tuscaloosa sometimes for the games, but I'd just stay in the hotel room. I just couldn't bear to watch. But I'd surely pray for him that he wouldn't get hurt. And of course I prayed they'd beat Tennessee, which they did.
I loved watching Paul play, even when it got rambunctious, which was all the time. I prayed that he wouldn't get hurt. And of course, I prayed they beat Tennessee, which they did.
Which we did. Tennessee was a rival back in the 30s, always had been. We didn't even play Auburn back then. We hadn't played them since the 7-7 tie in 1907. That was the only tie Alabama and Auburn ever had. That was a game in Birmingham where Alabama got the name Crimson Tide. Some sports writer picked it up because Alabama wore white uniforms and they was playing in red clay mud. And this sports writer nicknamed them the Crimson Tide. I guess on account of the rain and the red mud and the white uniforms. They weren't white anymore. Well, Auburn wasn't even Auburn. They were the Alabama Polytechnic Institute. Hell, that's as close to institute as that Cal College will ever get. They didn't even officially change the name of it until 1960 to Auburn. No, Alabama didn't start back playing Auburn until 1948. It was Tennessee we wanted to beat on that third Saturday in October, and we still do. There was one Tennessee game when I was a senior. I had one small complication. It seems like my leg was broke. I'd broken it the week before against Mississippi State.
I knew it.
So much for praying for Paul Bryant.
What is wrong with that boy? He's been hard-headed as a mule his whole life.
Yeah, if any normal fool, having broken legs, pretty good reason not to play. But a fool who'll wrestle a bear is that special kind of fool who'll play broken leg or not. The year before, 1934, we didn't lose a single game. We beat the Volunteers 13-6 that year. I guess I ought to admit I was ejected from the game in the second quarter. Something about unsportsmanlike conduct. But I'll be the first to tell you, I played pretty rough back then. Hell, I was always a rough player. Always rough and tumble guy. It's a good thing I took up football, or I might have ended up in jail. We went on to win the SEC championship, and then we upset Stanford in the Rose Bowl to win the national championship. Old Don Hudson played on that team. He is a great tight end. He's a great pass catcher. Second best man to play tight end I ever knew. But after graduation, it never occurred to me to try to play in the pros. To tell the truth, I've never had much affection for professional football. Sometimes when they pay you to play, whatever good you get out of it pretty much just comes down to that paycheck. But it's always been more than a paycheck to me. Not saying you can't live without one, but if you're living only for a paycheck, then you're not living for very much. I always told Mama that coaching was like preaching. I sort of sound like I'm preaching now, don't I? But a person is called to be a preacher, and I was called to be a coach. I was called by Frank Thomas. After I graduated, Coach Thomas asked me to stay on and be an assistant coach.
Bear never knew it, but I had my eye on him for a coach from his sophomore year. I used to draw up plays and formations on the chalkboard to talk about them. Then the next day, I'd have one of the players step up and explain what I'd showed them the day before. Most of them dreaded that and couldn't come up with a thing. But Bear knew every aspect of the offense and defense from top to bottom. He never hesitated. I offered Bryant $1,250 a year plus housing and transportation to be my line coach.
I wasn't exactly getting rich.
But not doing too badly. And for a married man with a baby on the way, nothing to sneeze at. Do you want the job?
Yes, sir. I do.
Well, it's a good thing I never found out about you being married, Bear.
Yes, sir, it is.
Although on balance, I think it did you more good than bad. I've always worried that a married football player might lose sight of the football in favor of the being married. But it just seemed to help you settle down and stay on the ball.
Thank you so much, Coach Thomas. This means a lot to us.
Just make sure it's a boy. We can always use another football player like this one.
As long as he's smarter than me.
He will be. He's got a smart mother.
But it wasn't a boy, at least not the first one. Mae Martin Bryant came into this world, and she is as beautiful as her mother. We named her after my mama. A few years later, during the war, Coach Thomas got his wish, and Paul Bryant Jr. came into the world. And he was smart, and he did get it from his mama. I was an assistant at Alabama until 1940. And then I took a job at Vanderbilt for 1 year. But that didn't work out. Nobody at Vanderbilt seemed to take football too seriously. There's a lot of smart people at Vanderbilt. And maybe they're a little bit too smart. Anyway, I went to Arkansas in 1941, and after Pearl Harbor, I joined the Navy. And even the Navy thought I ought to coach football, which I did. Though I did serve on a troop ship, USS Uruguay. I went to Morocco in 1942, but on our next trip to North Africa in 43, she got rammed accidentally by one of our own tankers. They ordered us all to abandon ship. I stayed on board to make sure my men got off all right. After that, they put me to coaching at a base in North Carolina, and that worked out all right for me. When the war was over, I got the job as head coach at Maryland, and I brought along a lot of these Navy players so to kind of give me a head start, which I needed. Maryland had been having losing seasons for years. I got them to 6-2-1 the 1 year I was there. But then they had this President Byrd. He and I got crossways. For some reason, he thought he could reinstate a player that I'd put off the team for a rules violation. I guess he didn't understand there ain't but one head coach, and that was me. And the rules are there for a reason. I believe if you have rules, you abide by them. So that was the end of my association with Maryland. But again, that worked out pretty good, because I went straight to Kentucky. Now, I'm not sure Kentucky even deserves to be called a southern school, being right on the border up there where it is. And they forevermore like basketball a whole lot more than they like football. But then they hired me. Yeah, and somebody with football sense finally came to Lexington. There's two things a coach needs when he's starting out. He needs a wife that's willing to put up with him and a lot of neglect.
I wonder if anybody else could put up with you.
And the other thing is a 5-year contract. When I went to Kentucky, I had them both. You need 5 years to get anything done. Don't forget that first year, you're playing with another man's team. So it took me a year before I got Kentucky into its first bowl game, ever. And 3 more years before Kentucky won the SEC championship for the first time, ever. That 1950 team beat Bud Wilkerson's Oklahoma Sooners in the Sugar Bowl, and they had been number 1 on account of they hadn't lost any games. And then because we beat them, one of the rating services picked us as the national champions. It didn't really count, and I never have really claimed it.
8 years at Kentucky before they chased you off. They really never got used to being good at football, did they?
They just didn't like football that much. And they didn't like it.
I don't think Kentucky will ever care much about football. not as long as they can play basketball. But they didn't chase me off. I chased myself off. I never did feel right with football playing second fiddle to anybody.
It wasn't so much Coach Rupp that was the problem. He was a great coach. Do you remember that time I was talking to the reporters before the Texas A&M game? He stuck his head in the door and said, "Don't forget, boys, the real show starts Monday."
That was tacky.
He just assumed that basketball was king at Kentucky, which it was. The place just wasn't big enough for both me and Rupp, and Rupp wasn't going anywhere.
So you got a divorce from Kentucky.
I didn't have to talk too much to get out of that contract. I just told them I was leaving, and they knew better than to try and make me stay.
You know, the thing was, it really couldn't have happened at a worse time. I'd just turned down offers from Southern Cal, Arkansas, and I'd even talked to somebody over at Alabama, and there weren't many schools looking for a head coach.
They offered you the job at Green Bay.
But I didn't want the pros. I wanted college.
So you dragged me out to the Texas desert.
Texas A&M is not in the desert, Mary Harmon. It might get a little hot in the summer.
A little hot? You just about killed those poor boys. It was so hot. No wonder so many left you high and dry.
But not you.
No, not me.
Yeah, in 1954, they offered me the job as an Aggie coach. We got there, and I got to tell you, there just ain't no there in College Station, Texas. It looked like military barracks for dorms. That and a lot of dust everywhere. And they didn't even have squat for a football team. So I get this bright idea that I'm going to load everybody on a bus and haul them out to Junction, Texas, which was even hotter, even less to look at, and even more dust. And that was a hell of a summer. Everybody thinks I must have been trying to kill off the team or do a survival of the fittest or some such nonsense. But I just wanted to see who had the guts to win. A third of them did leave me after that little summer workout. But every man I had left on that team felt like he could whip Joe Louis on a Saturday night. The difference between winning and losing is attitude. I'll never forget that. And I always tried to teach my players to be fighters. And that summer in Junction City, Texas, was the best classroom I ever had. And I didn't mean putting up their dukes and fighting, although I've done my share of that. I'm talking about facing adversity. I tell them that what I mean is when your house burns down and your wife runs off with the drummer and you've lost your job and the odds are against you, what are you going to do? Most people would just lay down and quit. Well, I want my people to fight back. And that's what those Aggie boys did. They got to believing they were good enough to win, and by damn they did. They went out and won. Well, except for that first year. They didn't do worth a shit that year. We went 1-9 in the only losing season I ever had. Boy, that hurt. But you got to remember, I was playing with another coach's team. I'd managed to chase half of them off. But after that, they got to winning so well that they won the Southwest Conference Championship in 1956. One thing about that was it was the only time I ever beat Texas. And we came that close to winning it again in 57. That's when I had John David Crow, won the Heisman. He is the only Heisman Trophy winner I ever played for me. You know, I was trying even then, even there, to get black players on the team. Some smart-ass newspaper man told me A&M would be the last place ever be integrated. I told him, well, that's where you're going to end up in the rankings, last place. But then in 1958, that's when everything just fell into place. And that was your mama called.
Paul Bryant, come on to the house. It's time for dinner. Paul.
You know, it was like when I was back there in Morrow Bottoms and I was out working in the field late of the afternoon, and you heard your mama calling you to come home to supper. That's what it was like when they offered me the job at Alabama. Mama called. And when mama calls, you're going to come running. You know, Alabama had gone straight downhill after Coach Thomas left. Terrible seasons. The only one had 4 wins in the last 3 years. It's like they'd forgotten what it's like to be a winner. Well, I ain't forgot. I never had. We went 5-4-1 that first year. The next year we beat Auburn and went to a bowl. That was the first time in 6 years either one of those things had happened. In 1961, though, I had Pat Trammell, one of the best quarterbacks I ever had. Billy Neighbors playing guard. Leroy Jordan leading the defense. We were 11-0. 11-0. And national champs. My first time ever as a head coach. And that team had everything you ever want in a team. They had guts, and they had courage, and they had heart, and they had confidence, and leadership. You know something, you don't have to talk a lot to be a great leader. Old Leroy was a great leader. He never said a word. But if he grunted, everybody in the room listened. The next year was just the same kind of young men, and they came pretty near to pulling it off twice in a row. Except we slipped up and lost to Georgia Tech by 1 point. That 62 squad played like it was a sin to give up 1 point. And there was this one young buck that came to Tuscaloosa in 62 who did make quite a name for himself. A fella called Joe Namath. Joe Willie Namath. Joe Namath was a great leader. He had his problems, which everybody knows about. But a man without problems is a man without a challenge. And if you don't have something to rise above, how do you expect to rise at all?
How you been, Coach?
Just tolerable, Joe, but I'm still kicking. Come over here and have a seat. It's really good to see you. What brings you down to Greene County?
Oh, I'm just in the area. You told me you were down here at the lodge, so here I am.
Well, how you been, Joe? You still ruling the roost on Broadway? Why, Broadway Joe? Why in the world anybody gave you a nickname like that? I'll never understand. That's a hell of a nickname.
And this coming from a man they call Bear. Nicknames. Now, people get nicknames. Hard to lose one once you get it, but Bear. People should just think a minute about the kind of man who can carry around a nickname like Bear.
Hey, I got to live up to it. I've been growling around this world for long enough. Most people think I really am tough as an old bear.
I think. There's no think about it. You had to be tough. They've given you enough guff over the years, accusing you of playing too hard or even getting your teams to hit too hard.
It ain't possible to hit too hard. I've taught them to go 100% for 5 seconds. That's what I ask. You go 100% for 5 seconds, you can make things happen. Sometimes that effort can lead to a mistake, though. And I never told Darwin Holt to hit that Georgia Tech player in the face. That was a bad hit. I'm sorry for it.
Man, yeah, they splashed that all over the papers, all over the country. Called your style of play vicious and dirty.
If they want vicious and dirty, they can come down to Morrow Bottom. We wrestle bears.
Bears, yes, I know. You wrestle bears. Oh, the worst thing I remember is the Georgia game, where they claim that you and the Georgia athletic director,
Wally Butts.
Wally Butts, yeah, that the two of you got together to make sure Georgia lost big, killing the point spread.
Yeah, the Saturday Evening Post ran that story in 1963. And there's never been more hogwash on a printed page in the history of reporting. But even being hogwash, the whole deal just tore me up. That was my name they was slopping around, my reputation at stake. I couldn't sleep the whole time that was going on. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, Joe. I had to go sleep in another room so Mary Harmon wouldn't see what I was going through. But she knew.
You know, that Georgia game was the opener. I mean, I should know.
Yeah, you should. That's the first start as quarterback.
Now that you mention it. Yeah. Yeah, the Post said that Butts had given you the whole offensive plan for Georgia, and that was why you'd won 35-0. I mean, my God, we didn't give up but 22 points the entire season. If there was a defense that ever needed less help to shut you down.
That is old Leroy's defense. Hell no, they didn't need anything. They had everything they needed down deep where it counts.
Yeah, well, the whole thing never amounted to anything. Yeah.
They paid me $360,000, but I don't know how much Butts got. The whole business pretty much drove the Saturday Evening Post out of business, and it's good riddance to bad rubbish as far as I was concerned.
Yeah. Well, they were mighty stupid to think the kind of man that would bench his starting quarterback for the last two seasons of the season, games of the season, would be, want to shave off a few lousy points against Georgia.
Well, that hadn't happened yet.
Yeah, but you were the same kind of man all the way through, and that had never changed.
Joe, you know I had to suspend you.
Yeah, I know.
A team has rules, and they're for everybody. If I'd let you break the rules and there'd been no consequences, then I'd have next year's team to coach. And the year after that, and the year after that. It's never just about one man, Joe.
I know that, Coach.
Yeah, I think you do now. But you didn't know it then.
Yeah, well, Bama won both those games without me. It's never just about one man.
You know, when I was a young coach, that was a long time ago, I always thought that you treat everybody the same. But that's bull. Treat everybody fairly. That's how you get their respect. You let that respect get away from you and the whole house comes tumbling down. You know, Joe, you was a pretty fair passer.
Yeah, I did all right. As little as you let me pass the ball.
I like to run the ball. There ain't no secret about that. 3 things can happen to you when you pass, and 2 of them are bad.
Yeah, well, try and tell that to the pros. They're looking for someone who can master the art of passing.
That's why they wanted you. You were the master passer. That makes me think about something. You remember when they invited me down to play on that master's course in Augusta?
That was like taking a pig to a beauty parlor.
Well, I admit I ain't never been much of a golfer, but a pig to a beauty parlor, I don't know about that. But I admit I ain't never thought much about the way I look, never gave much thought to my clothes, all that stuff, but except one thing. I want to see if you remember this. You remember where I got this?
Yeah, from Sonny Werblin, wasn't it?
Yep. He's the owner of the New York Jets. I think that when they drafted you, number 1 in '65, he sort of felt sorry, and this was a goodwill gesture. I've been wearing it pretty much all the time since then.
Well, it suits you. Well, I better be getting along. Take care of yourself, Coach.
You too, Broadway Joe. You keep winning, buddy. With your team.
A fellow once taught me all about that.
Old Joe was the first player I invited up to my tower. That's another idea of mine. And I don't think it sat too well with people. When I built it, let's see, back in '63, having a tower out on the practice field, maybe that seemed like I was playing God and looking down on everybody. That's what a lot of people said at the time. Well, it didn't make a damn to me what people thought. All I know is from up there I could see everything all at once. And that's how I knew what was going on that needed fixing, or what was going on that was right. And it's important to know both. But don't think it was some kind of clubhouse. Hell no, that was my place. And I was the only one allowed up there unless I invited you. And I never invited any player up there, leastways not when he was a player for me. When it's coach and player, there's always got to be a distance between you. After they graduate, then maybe it's possible for them to be your friend, but never while they're playing for you. Namath came up to my tower after he had left Tuscaloosa and made his own way in the world. To stay fair, you got to keep some distance, and there ain't no better distance than 30 feet straight up in the air. Not that I didn't come down sometime, get up close and personal, but that wasn't considered a good thing. Those boys would hear that chain rattling, chain that was a little handrail going up the stairs, and they'd hear that chain rattling and know I was coming down for somebody, and I probably wasn't going to congratulate him. In 1964, Namath took us to another national championship, my second at Alabama. And when Joe left, there's a lot of folks wondered how we were ever going to replace somebody of his caliber. But old Steve Sloan, he is up to the job, and we won the championship that year too, twice in a row. 64 and 65. And then came 1966. Kenny Stabler had come to town in 1964. And in '66, he is our starting quarterback. Snake. They started calling him Snake down in high school down in Foley, Alabama. His coach said he ran like a snake. Whatever that means. But I know run, pass, hand it off, or eat it. It didn't matter. Stabler would find a way to beat you.
Yeah, I remember that damn tower of his. He came down a lot to congratulate me. Yeah, I guess I needed it. I sure as hell didn't like it.
But he did need it. Don't think I climbed up and down those steps for my health.
You know, there's an old joke. Fella gets to heaven. St. Peter's showing him around, and they see where all the famous people ended up. Now, there was George Washington throwing a silver dollar across the Potomac, and Abe Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address. And the fella spies this great tall tower there with a man at the top of it, yelling down at a bunch of football players. Fella says, "Well, I know who that is. That's Bear Bryant, ain't it?" St. Peter says, "Nope, that's God. He just thinks he's Bear Bryant."
I like that one. I'm gonna tell that one to Mary Harmon.
Coach Bryant was a hard man. Fair, sure, but not always easy to get along with. He really knew how to get your attention. If an auditorium was packed full of people and Coach Bryant walked in through the back door, before anybody knew why, the whole place would kind of tighten up. Voices would quiet down and backs would straighten. That's the kind of man he was.
Old Snake and I didn't always see eye to eye. He had a lot of rebel in him. In his very first game, we had a play where he was just supposed to pitch the ball to the running back.
Yeah, but I spotted Ray Perkins break free, and I fired that ball to him for a touchdown. When I got over to the sidelines, I was expecting to get, a little praise or something for thinking on my feet and all.
I told him, "Listen, son, you can't never trust a left-handed crapshooter or a left-handed quarterback." We had a play called, and I didn't want him to get used to just winging it.
The very next game, I called an audible, changed the play he'd sent in, got another touchdown.
Thought I was going to brag on him again. I told him, when I send something in, you don't have to run it. Run whatever you like, but you make damn sure it works.
But everybody remembers the most boneheaded thing I ever did. The one thing that didn't work. We're trying to make a comeback against Tennessee. It's late in the game, and there are no timeouts left. So I threw a pass out of bounds to stop the clock. Only thing was, it was 4th down. We lost. When we went back down there to the locker room there at Neyland Stadium, boy, I knew I was going to get my ass chewed out, but good. But when we got down there, the door was locked, and Coach didn't have the key. He just hit that door with his forearm and busted it off its hinges.
I was as mad as I've ever been about anything. When we got inside, I told all assistant coaches to leave the room.
It was just him and the team. Jesus, I was scared shitless. The coach, he just stood there for a minute, staring down at the floor, and then he looked up and he said,
I told him, I said, "Men, I want to apologize for not preparing you people well enough to win today. It was us, not you, that lost this game, and I'm sorry."
Can you believe it? He took the blame for my stupidity. No wonder we all love the man.
In the spring of 1967, Kenny tore up his knee. I told him to skip spring training and get healed up. Instead, he started cutting class. He went back down to Foley, started drinking beer, just laying around.
I got a telegram from him saying I was indefinitely suspended. He didn't care for his players cutting class. Then I got another telegram from Joe Namath. It said, he means it.
Yeah, and Joe knew that as well as anybody.
Well, I decided Coach Bryant and Alabama football could both go to hell. I started partying like there's no tomorrow. Then it looked like I was about to get drafted. Yeah. So I went back to Tuscaloosa and enrolled in some summer school classes and went to see Coach Bryant about getting back on the team.
I told him, "Stabler, you don't deserve to be on my football team."
And I told him I was coming out anyway. When fall practice started, I didn't get a first team red jersey or even a white second team. I got some old brown jersey they dug up somewhere. I knew what that meant. When the season started, I didn't. Joe Kelly was the starting quarterback against Florida State. When the second series started, Coach put me in, and that's where I stayed.
That fall, old Snake made some Crimson Tide history of his own against Auburn. It was raining like hell in Birmingham. Legion Field wasn't anything but one big mud hole.
We were behind 3-0 in the fourth quarter, and Auburn had pretty much been owning us all afternoon. But then they fumbled a punt snap, and we recovered it on their 47-yard line.
Old Stabler stood right there in the middle of Legion Field and all that muck. And he took the snap and he rolled to the right on an option.
But the receiver was covered.
And he started running.
Right down the sideline.
47 yards.
Kind of dancing along like it was a tightrope.
He scored the only touchdown in the game that day, and we won.
They called it the run in the mud. It was a hell of a play.
Yes, sir, Snake, it was a hell of a play.
Coach, I'm sorry about that spring and summer in '67. I wasn't acting like a man.
But you learned, son. You learned. You for damn sure made it work for you when you had to.
Thanks, Coach.
Snake was a good man. He had bad knees just like Namath. But he did a great job for the Oakland Raiders. Made some great plays and won a Super Bowl. Now here's the truth. A good, quick, small team can beat a big, slow team anytime. I always wanted my players to show class. Knock them down and pat them on the butt and run them back to the huddle. And that's how those players behave. They'd run down there and try to kill you, but then they'd be a gentleman. I don't doubt for a minute that those 64, 65, 66 teams will be remembered more for their size as they are for their achievements. But in '66, with Stabler and one of the best teams that ever played the game, they couldn't achieve one thing nobody else has ever done, and that's 3 in a row national championship. Hell, that 66 team should have won it all. And as far as I'm concerned, they did. They were undefeated and they was untied, and they was the best team in the country that year. Now here's what gets me. Michigan State and Notre Dame had played each other to a damn tie during the regular season. You heard right, a tie. It's like they was both kissing their sisters with the other one watching them. When you're number one, you don't play for a tie. If you don't at least try to win the game, then you don't deserve the championship. That's how I felt about it then, and that's how I feel about it now. But the polls put us at number 3 below both of them. And I don't care what the Notre Dame people say. We were the best. But so what if the polls voted us down? So what if I never beat Parsegan? That's the cards we got dealt. And that's the hand I had to play. But no matter what the hand is, you stay until you see it through. Never quit. Never. You set a goal and you don't quit until you reach it. Then you set another goal and you don't quit till you reach that one. Because if you start quitting, it won't stop. The first time, it's hard, tough to quit. Second time, it gets a little easier. And then the third time, you don't even have to think about it. You just quit. There's one thing, though, one thing that I didn't exactly quit on, but I damn sure didn't push as hard as I should have. That's integration. If you want to know the one single thing that changed football at Alabama more than any other thing, it would have to have been integration. Well, it didn't just change football in Tuscaloosa. Having black players playing on the team changed life in Tuscaloosa. One day it was an all-white team. The next time it was a white and a black team. You know, the student body never blinked. Sort of made you wonder where all opposition had come from. Except there wasn't any doubt about where the opposition had come from. Alabama alumni don't take change real easy. They never have. And especially this change. The memory of George Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door wasn't that old. I'd been doing what I could to get the door open for years. Although, truth be told, this bothers me. I probably should have done more, and I could have done more. But the fact is, there wasn't any doubt we'd never be able to stay competitive without integration. There were too many great black athletes playing colleges all over the country. I knew the time was coming when we'd be on the losing end of the stick. So in 1970, I contacted my old friend John McKay out at Southern Cal. I had this idea that us playing the Trojans might be a good way to stir the pot. And Lord have mercy, was I right.
I met with Coach Bryant at LA International in April of 1970. He had flown out to the West Coast, told everybody that he had come out there to play in the Bob Hope Desert Classic Golf Tournament.
That's a laugh. You show me a football coach who's a good golfer, and I'll show you a horseshit football coach.
So we met in the Horizon Room, and I said, Paul, what can I do for you? We had a drink, and Coach Bryant told me that he wanted Alabama to play USC that fall as the first game of the season in Birmingham. Well, I thought about it a minute. I told him we'd do it. If he agreed to come out to Los Angeles and play USC as the season opener in '71.
I said that'd be fine. We shook hands and he got up to leave.
And just as quick as that, history had been made. We had just decided to play the first integrated football game in the state of Alabama.
Now, some people, they think I arrange those games as an excuse to shame those stiff-necked segregationists into accepting the future. Anybody who thinks I ever scheduled a game with the eye to losing it on purpose is a damn fool. But we did lose that first game in 1970, and we lost it bad.
Came to Birmingham, and we beat Alabama 42-21. Our star running back, Sam Cunningham,
was a black player.
He ran for 135 yards. He just shredded the Bama defensive line. And Clarence Davis,
another great black player, and he was from Birmingham.
Got a couple of touchdowns for himself.
I'm telling you this, Sam Cunningham and Clarence Davis did more for integration in Alabama in 60 minutes than I'd ever done in 20 years. We started recruiting black players immediately, and with the alumni's 100% backing. Oh, you can rest assured about that. I don't like to lose, But that one loss did more to shake things up than I ever did just talking about it.
Next year, Alabama came out to Los Angeles, and unfortunately for us, things turned out a little differently. Alabama handed us a 17-10 loss. Seems they had been practicing all summer on a new formation.
There's a little thing called a wishbone. Probably the best thing I ever stole from Texas.
That was the kind of wrinkle he always had up his sleeve.
Oh, I'm no innovator, and if anything, I'm a robber. At best, I'm a borrower. I've stolen or borrowed from more people than you can shake a stick at.
Take it from me. Coach Bryant is not just a coach. He's the coach.
We already had some black players on that 71 team. John Mitchell and Wilbur Jackson. John came in as a starter. He played defensive end for all 24 games that he was in Tuscaloosa. You want to know something, how smoothly it went? The next year, in 1972, John Mitchell was a defensive captain. That's how quick things turn around. And it made a huge difference in every aspect of the game. We did all right in the 70s, I guess. 8 SEC championships and 3 national championships. I don't like to brag, but if you got a hoe, that ain't a bad row of cotton to work on. Funny thing, all 3 of those national championships we played in the Sugar Bowl. We didn't win all 3 of those bowl games, though. In 73, Notre Dame got a touchdown with 5 minutes to go. Made the score 24-23. We were making a comeback when the clock ran out. Anyway, I don't consider that a loss. We just ran out of time. Coach's poll had us at number 1 at the end of the regular season when we was 11-0. I guess Parsegan claims a split championship for that year. I guess. At least we got part of it instead of being shut out like we were in '66. But the one that everybody remembers was the 1979 Sugar Bowl. We had one loss that season to USC early on, and Penn State was unbeaten and number 1 coming into the game. Joe Paterno's little cocky self came over to me before the game commenced and asked me why I wasn't wearing my hat. I told him my mama taught me not to wear my hat indoors. We didn't do a lot of scoring in that game, and neither team did. But late in the game, we were up 14-7. And Penn State got the ball back with 4 minutes to go. They drove down and had 3rd and goal on the 1-yard line with less than a minute. They was cocky then. Their quarterback actually asked old Marty Lyons, one of our linebackers, said, what he thought they should run. Marty said, you better pass it. They ran, and they didn't make it. They ran again, and they didn't make it. I tell my teams that if you play them jaw to jaw, you'll win it in the 4th quarter. And that's what we did that New Year's night in 1979. You know, I always believe offense sells tickets, but defense wins games and national championships. I hope to hell they never forget that at Alabama. I don't think Penn State will. I know this much. Alabama football will survive anything because we play the most interesting football there is. We play to win. It's getting a little chilly in here. You know, it's funny how when they put in a new road or tear down a building and put up a new one, it don't take long before you can't even remember how things were before. You take McFarland Boulevard back up there in Tuscaloosa. I can't for the life of me remember how Tuscaloosa looked before they built that road. And I've been living there for about 100 years. I can't really recall how it used to be in football. So many things have changed. White and blacks playing together, all those championship rings. When I was a player, it was the box formation. Then the passing game became important. Then the wing formation with the flanker out. Then the wishbone. All those strategies and plans changing all the time. But one constant thing has been, we've had a long string of winners playing here. That parade of faces marching past, just full of character and something else. I've never been a brilliant man, but I do have one gift. I can smell a winner. Or at least good people who can become winners if they'll pay the price. Young men who have desire, who won't quit, who keep fighting whatever happens, whatever the odds. That's been the one constant thing. That's what's been in all those faces. One of those faces was a young man who came to campus in 1977. A young player who made even me appreciate that passing the ball might not be all bad. Ozzie Newsome came from up there in Leeton, Alabama. Unlike almost every other player who ever came to play for me, he started all 4 years, right from his freshman year on. But that was because he wasn't like most players. He came to town full grown and ready to be a champion.
I knew about the program in Alabama, and I knew that this was a place I could make my mark. In 1974, you couldn't exactly say that being black in the state of Alabama has changed all that much, but from everything I heard, being black and playing for the Alabama Crimson Tide was a whole different story.
Ozzie figured out real quick that I was only prejudiced about one thing. Was a young man willing to work hard, and was he a winner? And did he have the heart of a winner? I guess that's two things.
Martin Luther King Jr. preached equality, and Coach Bryan practiced it. I'm not saying he couldn't have done more to integrate the Alabama football team any quicker, but when I was there were absolutely no complaints from any black players about the unfairness from Coach Bryan.
Like I said, treat everybody fairly.
I can tell you this, the man practiced what he preached.
You know, everyone is different. If you treat them all alike, you won't reach anybody. But be fair with all of them, and you got a chance. One, you can pat him on the back, and he'll jump out the window for you. Another one, you kick in the tail, and another one you yell at. But be fair, and that's what I am.
People used to tell me, man, if you would have went to some other school where they threw the ball more, you could have set all kinds of records. Well, I'm happy with the numbers I set right here at Alabama, because I got to learn football from Coach Bear Bryant.
Ozzie, you know how I feel about throwing the ball. When you throw it, three things can happen. Wait a minute, I think I've already talked about that.
You said that a lot, Coach.
Yeah, I suppose I have. Well, when something's true, it's worth repeating. Thank God we threw it to you. It was mainly the one good thing that happened whenever we'd throw it to you. They used to call him the Wizard of Oz.
You know, you still could have had a little bit more offense and wouldn't have hurt my feelings any. But yes, I know. Offense sells tickets.
And defense wins games.
You said that a lot too, Coach.
Some coaches have accused me of being too defensive minded. But most of them are the ones who wound up being athletic directors. I'll admit, though, there's one pass play I do love. My favorite one is where you just pitch it back to the official after you've made a touchdown.
I like that play too, Coach.
You know, I said that Don Hudson was the second best tight end I ever knew. That's because Ozzie Newsome was the best. Good whiskey. Life's too short to drink bad liquor. And I can afford the good stuff. And that wasn't always true, but I can now. But I've always been a drinker. Some would say I drink too much. Hell, I'll say it. It's true. But I was raised that way. You grow up a man-child in the South and you're going to drink. And that generally means whiskey. Even when I was a boy back in Fordyce, we'd go out to the honky-tonks and drink and dance. Well, it looked like dancing sometime. One summer after I was in college, I was back home and a couple of my buddies and me got liquored up and went out raising hell. It ended up being one unholy mess. I got into a terrible fight. Almost killed a man. I hit him so hard. I hid out at my cousin's house for the rest of the summer and managed to get back to Tuscaloosa without even going to jail. I swore to the Almighty God, if I could just get out of that scrape, I'd never do anything stupid again. Well, I got out of it, but I ain't sure I kept up my end of the bargain. Like I said, I've been a drinker all my life, and it ain't always been pretty. There's plenty of tales about Bear Bryant being smashed to the gills and practically falling downstairs and in public. But for the most part, I've always managed to put on a passable act. And it's never, not once, got in the way of my coaching. That's too important. That's the reason I wake up in the morning. That's what I go to sleep thinking about. That's what I dream about all night. Still, I reckon I could have been a better man if I didn't drink as much. In 1978, I actually entered a rehabilitation program. But it didn't take. Anyway, I can say for damn sure I'm not an alcoholic. And why not? Because I don't go to any of those meetings. You know, back when I started out and for most of my career, nobody made much money coaching football. You do well to break even, be comfortable. But it sure takes a lot of pressure off of you when you're not broke. You know, the only president that's ever been fired at Alabama was against football. Every new president cuts his teeth on it. And he better be for it. Because if he's not, they won't win and he'll get fired. In Alabama, you better be for football or you might as well leave. And I guess because it's such an institution down here is why folks decided we ought to try to take advantage of it. And I had this little Sunday afternoon television show during the season. And guess what they called it? The Bear Bryant Show. I own the game films, and every Sunday for 25 years, we'd review them on the television. My sponsors were Golden Flake potato chips and Coca-Cola. Had a bag of chips and a bottle of Coke right there in front of me every show. Great pair, says the Bear. That was the slogan. I made a little money on that. And for some reason, this hat of mine caught on all around the state, except from right down there around Auburn. And they got me to make some commercials for some products, and that helped keep me and Mary Harmon in beans and grits. I remember one commercial, though, that I did for South Central Bell about calling long distance. In the script, I was supposed to say, "Have you called your mama today?" Which I said. But then on my own, I added, "I sure wish I could call mine." And I still do wish that. People ask me all the time how I got to where I am, wherever that is. And that's not a hard question, but the answer probably is harder than you think. Look, I don't talk politics. I never have. But when I was on my 65th birthday, old Jake Reese down at the Birmingham Touchdown Club gave me a surprise party. Maybe it was a surprise that put me off guard, or it might have been the whiskey. Whatever the reason that night, I told folks who my favorite president had been. And it wasn't his politics, but his integrity that made him my favorite. Harry Truman had that sign on his desk, "The buck stops here." Well, that's how I feel about being a head coach. A pass gets intercepted, I threw it. A punt gets blocked, I caused it. A bad game, it's the head coach who assumes responsibility. If anything goes bad, I did it. If it goes semi-good, we did it. And if it goes good, they did it. That's what it gets to take people to win football games.
You got a minute, Coach?
Well, Pat Dye, you old son of a gun, come in here, son. Have a seat. Of course I got a minute.
How you feeling, Bear?
Well, I felt better, Pat. I won't lie to you. Does it feel a little bit cold in here?
Maybe a little.
Why don't you try some of this?
Don't mind if I do.
That'll warm you up there, son. I was thinking about you just the other day, about when you got that job down at Auburn, Pat.
Oh, yeah? You ain't never been very happy about that, have you?
Oh, it don't matter what I think.
Then what was on your mind?
You know, I was thinking about one time I got into the office about 7 o'clock, and I called down there to talk to Sugar or somebody on the staff, and the little girl said nobody was in yet. I said, "What's the matter, honey? Don't you people take football seriously down there?" I just never felt like that coaching staff took it seriously.
Well, what's that got to do with me?
Because, Pat, I know how serious you take it.
You told me not.
Didn't seem like it was a good fit.
You told me not to take the Auburn job.
That's just my opinion. You might have come back up here and maybe been my assistant again. Hell, I wanted you to take over when I leave.
Bear, if I took over, all they'd ever want was a maintenance man. Somebody to keep doing what you done. Ain't nobody can do that. I sure as hell don't want to do it, and I can't beat you if I'm your assistant.
Pat, you know you ain't gonna beat me.
And Coach, you know you ain't gonna live forever.
Well, That's true, I reckon, but as long as I do, you ain't never going to beat me.
And we'll see.
Yes, we will.
You know, I learned a lot when I coached for you, more than I could have anywhere else.
You learned it as well, Pat, as anybody ever did.
And you know, I ain't never been very happy about that night when you broke the record. But it was something to be there that night. I just wish it hadn't been against Auburn.
You know, I'm not one to give fate any credit. A person makes his own luck. But sometimes you got to wonder if maybe fate didn't play some kind of hand in things. And getting number 315 against Auburn is just one of those things.
Yeah, but don't think you're going to win them all against Auburn. For one thing, we got some hosses coming to play down on the plains. There's this fella named Bo Jackson.
I know about Bo. We recruited him, and I told him he'd take a year to learn the system, but he'd see a lot of playing time on the field after that, if he worked out.
Yeah, well, I told him he'd start right away, so I reckon that's why he come to Auburn. You know, I did learn a lot from you, you old coon hunter, and don't think I ain't too proud to use what I learned against you.
Yeah, just how long you think it's going to take you to beat Alabama, Pat?
Coach, about 60 minutes.
Maybe I kept a few of those tricks for myself. You'll need a miracle to beat me.
Well, I don't believe in miracles. I believe in character. That's the best trick I ever got from you, Coach. I'll be seeing you. You keep it between the ditches, you hear?
Pat, I'll see you, and you come back to see me anytime.
I'll see you, Coach.
I'll see you, son. That was 1981 when we beat Auburn for number 315. More wins than any coach since Alonzo Stagg. We had a pretty good year that year. We won every SEC game and ended up splitting the SEC championship with Georgia. But we slipped up and we lost to Georgia Tech. And Southern Miss came up to Tuscaloosa and fought us to a 13-13 tie. Southern Miss. And I should have seen what was coming. And maybe I did. Then Texas beat us in the Cotton Bowl, and damn it, I never beat Notre Dame, and I couldn't beat Texas, at least not while I was at Alabama. But Southern Miss tie, that should have been an alarm bell, the wake-up call. Because in 1982, things just came off the rails. Southern Miss didn't tie us. They beat us in Tuscaloosa. Sure, we'd climbed all the way up to number 2 in the polls. And then we dropped one to Knoxville by a touchdown. Then we dropped 3 in a row, LSU, Southern Miss, and Auburn. Hell, Southern Miss beat us on homecoming. Our homecoming. And Pat Dye did get that win on me. Probably what I get for bragging to him. Oh, we beat Illinois in the Liberty Bowl, bless their heart. But I'd seen the handwriting on the wall. I damn sure wasn't going to hang around and let Alabama actually have a losing season. I knew it was time to go. They didn't have to ask me to go, to leave the way they did Coach Rupp. And age didn't have nothing to do with it. You can be out of touch at any age. No, I just knew I had to leave under my own steam and on my own terms. So the Liberty Bowl made 323 wins. Sure, somebody's bound to break that record sooner or later. That's just the nature of a record. I just hope I don't live to see it. And there's some folks I definitely don't want to see win it, like Joe Paterno. Alonzo Stagg held that record since 1946. He played a lot different back then. He played a shorter season, had no bowl games. So what he did was doggone amazing. He is a great coach. But I ain't half bad. So I'm rightly proud of what we've done over the years. Even though someone's going to break the record one day, nobody will ever get there with a better bunch of coaches and young men than I had around me. I gave my life to this game, and I wouldn't change a thing. Well, maybe a few things. Because I realize that anybody who gets this involved in one thing is a damn fool. You get to the point when 30 minutes after the last game's over, you start thinking about the next game. And when the season's over, it's always a few days before you even realize it. And when you do, you start thinking about the next season. And it just never stops. And that's not all there is to life, Mary Harmon. I know I'm different. I can't help the way I am. But it's been too hard on you. There ought to be a special place in heaven just for coaches' wives. It's really not been any kind of life for you.
Is there another kind of life? I'm married to Paul Bear Bryant. That's more than enough for one life. I'm satisfied. I have always been proud of you.
You remember what I said about you putting up with me and a lot of neglect?
Well, I have had to put up with you, that's the truth. And you always made sure your other love got enough attention.
Other love? What other love?
Football.
Football?
Sometimes I wonder what you'd say if you had to choose between me and Alabama football. Oh, I know Paul Bryant would choose me. But Bear Bryant might have to think a minute.
Mary Harmon, you're the most beautiful gal me or anybody else has ever seen. You know, it's been a good life. I've had more than my share of victories. Even my defeats were a kind of victory. They always gave me something to overcome. Gave me another chance to win. Because when it's all said and done, and there's no more to achieve, there's no goal to cross or battle to fight. When people ask me what I do and what I want to be remembered for, I just have one answer. I never wanted to be the greatest coach in the world. When I walk off the field, I just want to be called a winner. That's how I want people to remember me. Because I ain't never been nothing but a winner.
Took
I remember
over,
that.
all they'd ever want was a maintenance.
I'm married
Everybody
to
started
Paul
calling me
Bear
Bear.
Bryant.
I
That's
sure as
more
hell
than enough
don't
for
want
one
to do it.
life.
Slapping me on the back and hollering,
I
have
suppose
always
you
This
should
boy's
have
a bear.
I sure as hell
We
didn't
can
like
always
it.
use
This
another
boy's a
football
bear.
player.
Coach,
I've always
no,
been
you ain't
proud
gonna
of
Coach
live
This
Bryant
boy's a
and
bear.
Alabama
You ain't
football,
gonna live
both
forever.
go to
I've
hell.
always
This
been proud
boy's a
of you.
bear.
Both go to
You ain't
hell.
gonna
We
live
can
forever.
always use another
I
football
have
player like
always
this
been
one.
proud of
You
you.
ain't gonna live forever.
I have always been proud of you.
Paul? Paul?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
It's time to come home, Paul.
Yes, ma'am, I reckon it is.